Great. Okay. Right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, to all of you for joining us this morning, for having the panel in your homes or offices. So we've got 2 hours. I'm going to talk for about 5 minutes initially by way of introduction. The panel will discuss our topic for this morning, why we write songs, for about an hour. There'll then be a very short 5-minute break. And then we've got approximately 50 minutes for your points and questions on the topic. And I'll introduce our panel shortly. We have had a little bit of musical chairs with our panel this morning due to all the things that are going on in the world. And particular thanks to Professor Baker, who's joining from Melbourne, and to Bonnie Baker from Nashville, who have got quite extreme time differences. We have lost Mary Gauthier from our panel due to time difference and gigs and so on. And just if anybody who'd been in touch with me about that and was keen to see her speak on this topic, I'm hoping there will be another chance. I'm running a series of different panels on this topic, and she's keen to join one in the autumn. So if you particularly wanted to hear from her, look out for the email from the Songwriting Studies Research Network, and I'll let you know about that opportunity. Also, if you feel that you would be a good panel member for this topic, I'd love to hear from you. I've still got other panels that I'm curating, and I'd love to hear from other people. As you know, this event is hosted by the Songwriting Studies Research Network, and I'm very grateful to Simon and Mike for their support in setting this up. I'm very grateful for the existence of that network, actually. I think it's a wonderful resource, and I hear there is a forthcoming in-person, real-life event planned for the SSRN in the autumn. So look out for news on that, and I will certainly be there and look forward to seeing you all there. So I'll just say a few words about why we're here this morning, and then I'll introduce our panel and hand over for them to do all of the talking. And I'll just add that whilst I would like to stay on topic as much as possible for my own selfish reasons, I recognise this is a great opportunity to quiz our panel, and you can, of course, feel free to ask questions about any of their area of work as you see fit as we progress in the second hour. So why have I organised this morning? Well, I've embarked on a new research project, which I hope will culminate in a book, to look into the reasons why we write songs. And I'm interested in that across the whole world of different types of songwriting, different applications of songwriting. For better or worse, it seems that songs are becoming unshackled from the predominantly commercial purpose that's dominated the 20th century, and it would appear that more and more songs are being written today than ever before, despite the seemingly clear fact that there's less opportunity to create large sums of income from the practice. So why are these songs being written? It seems to me that some reasons for songwriting are rather clear. For example, to make money, to protest, to document family or local stories and events, and for therapeutic purposes. But there are other reasons that don't fit particularly well into one of those categories. And my master's students have really inspired me and the team in the last 5 years with finding a variety of surprising and fascinating purposes for songwriting practice. So in the course of this research, over the next couple of years, I'm going to be chairing roundtable panel discussions with key thinkers. In fact, this is the third that I've run. I'm running them with my master's students and graduates and my faculty, and I hope to run more events like today. Right, I'll now introduce our panel, and they've each furnished me with a few words, which I'll read. So first of all, to introduce to you any of you who haven't met her before, Professor Felicity Baker. Felicity Baker is a professor at the University of Melbourne. She's been a music therapist and researcher for the past 30 years. Felicity has accumulated more than 15 million Australian dollars in grants, including 4 National Health and Medical Research Council grants. She's a former Australian Research Council Future Fellow, which involved her developing models of therapeutic songwriting as practiced through the lens of different therapeutic orientations and across the lifespan. Her 2015 book, Therapeutic Songwriting Developments in Theory, Methods and Practice, won her the World Federation of Music Therapy Research and Publication Prize. She's the second ever recipient of this award. And I'd just like to add that for anybody who's not familiar with that book, we have it as a set text on several of our modules at ICMP, and I think it's an enormously helpful resource in what it teaches us about songwriting generally. And I really recommend it to you. And thank you again for joining us from Melbourne, Felicity. Okay, next to introduce is Julian Marshall, who is ICMP faculty member. He's a songwriter, composer, teacher, lecturer, mentor, producer, musician, and researcher. In the late 70s and 80s, Julian found chart success with the bands Marshall Hain, Flying Lizards, and Eye to Eye. And he's now a classical composer, and his compositions include music for film and theatre with a particular focus on choral work. More recently, this year, in fact, he formed Blueberry Lake Art, a production home and online performance space for new work, solo and collaborative. And Julian will tell us more about that work as we go on, I'm sure. He's a teaching fellow at the Institute of Contemporary Music Performance, where I probably should have said at the beginning, I was doing that thing of assuming everyone knew me, that I'm Sophie Daniels and I'm the head of songwriting at ICMP. And a pleasure to meet anybody here this morning who I haven't previously met. Thank you for joining us this morning, Julian. Next, I'd like to introduce Peter Cunnah. Great friend of ours from a while back, because he previously was also teaching for us in London, but probably one of the very, very few people I know who can be introduced by means of his having written one song, which is an internationally famous song called Things Can Only Get Better, which he wrote with the band Ream. And he's been a songwriter and producer for many years. Ream is still going strong, and they have their fourth studio album coming out next week, I think Pete said. Is that right?
It's out last week, but
it's out last week.
Let's not split hairs.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
One of my favorite UK hit writers. And speaking of hit writers, joining us from Nashville, we have our friend Bonnie Baker. Did I mention it is 5 a.m. in Nashville? Thank you so much for being here. Bonnie's sold over 10 million albums as a hit songwriter in the US. The biggest names that have cut Bonnie's songs are Reba, Rascal Flatts, and Hunter Hayes. Bonnie's had Grammy nominations and has been writing songs for over 23 years. More recently, she's become an adjunct teacher at MTSU in Nashville in the commercial songwriting department. And I know she lectures on gender and identity, and she's also been involved in an independent film commenting on this area recently. There's lots of different things we can talk about this morning. And she's also a very passionate creativity coach and mentor. And thank you for being with us. Absolutely. Finally, on our panel, we've got Dr. Kit Ashton, who I initially met through the SSRN, which I was very grateful to meet Kit, who's recently joined our faculty. And Kit is a doctor of songwriting. His research is into investigating the ways in which applied ethnomusicology can help revitalize endangered languages, with a focus on the critically endangered language of Jurai in his home island of Jersey. And that's Jersey behind Kit there. Kit has got 2 decades of broad experience in popular music education, and more recently ethnomusicology. He's worked in a range of different musical projects as a performer and writer, including touring with Carleen Anderson and Electric Soft Parade. He's just been appointed to be the module leader for a new module on the Master Songwriting at ICMP in London, which is called Established and Progressive Songwriting Industry. And Kit's current band, I hope I can say this, Bad Lebecs, are unique in, thank you, are unique in that they sing in the language of Jurai. Okay, so I think I've said enough. There's lots of quotes I've got here that might be useful to us as we progress, but the panel have got their own resources and had some resources for me, and I know that there's an awful lot for us to talk about this morning, so I want to mostly hand over to them. Just a reminder, please, to everybody else to stay on mute until the break. And I'd like to open with a question which I'll put to each of the panel in turn. And I might start with you, Julian, if that is okay. And the question is, why do you write songs?
It's so great because every time we have this kind of conversation, Sophie, it's an opportunity to kind of re-engage with that question and not to try and give a pat answer. Well, I suppose the first thing I would say is that I find it exciting, that I find it really compelling, and it's something which has remained as an exciting and sometimes scary process, however long I have done it. And that kind of cliche of every time kind of starting again is actually pretty true for me. But I suppose one of the things is that it's an opportunity to explore, and to explore in what I would kind of call, the imaginal realm, the opportunity to kind of not really be fully in control of my faculties and to open up to a process which really teaches me. And I think that's the thing which has shifted in my writing is I used to be a much more controlled writer, where I had a fairly kind of clear intent with a capital I. And now I would say that that's much shifted into having a general sense of direction, but then kind of letting go into as much as I can, and I'm able to kind of into that process and then see what it brings and throws up along the way. So if I was going to choose one word, it would be a sense of adventure and a sense of not knowing. And with all that entails, including, of course, the risk that it may not lead anywhere.
That's lovely. Thank you. It's really interesting to keep talking to you about this on an ongoing basis and see how your answer is evolving.
Changed every time.
No, it's not. It's not. Yeah. It's not.
Right.
Pete, could I come to you next, please? I know you've been writing songs for a long time. Why do you write songs?
Oh, that's a great question. I have to say, I love what you said, Julian. I love that idea of adventure and not knowing. I'm still a bungling amateur in a world of geniuses, and I jump in there and somehow it comes out okay. I find my way through. Sometimes your ego tells you you're a black belt when actually you're wearing a white one. And so you know about the dans in karate. So I mean, I started writing because the guy who was in my band, who was a couple of years older than me when I was 15, he kept the song file, what he called song file. He'd heard about it from Sting and Elton John. So he religiously put all these small ideas on his cassette tape. And and I saw him do this. So I just started emulating it. And there was nothing to write home about. Let me tell you, it was just like the early ramblings of any child. And then I built up that system. And to be honest, it took several years and nearly 300 ideas before I got to Things Gonna Get Better, which you talked about earlier, the first incarnation of that, because I grew, without any guidance, I grew the process of songwriting, and I grew to be conscious of it, what you now call mindful. So I think what's happened to me, some synapses have been well over-exercised to the point where if I even get up to the loo at 5 a.m., if I'm not careful, a song idea is going to come in, and that's me up. I'm on the walk. I'm like straight onto the smug phone. On goes the idea, and that's do you know? So I have to be really careful. It's so it's like part of me now. I'm constantly switched on, and sometimes I'm writing. Well, I wrote back in the day. I was a hired hand, and I wrote commercially, and then I write personally as well. Something I do with my band, and I've got songs that I've written that just come out and I can't have them with my band because they're either too ridiculous or they're too much of a flight of fancy, but I still love them. And I have to say, mine is a spiritual relief. I get some sanity out of it, some spirituality, and I really feel I'm in touch with something really, really special when I'm doing that thing. And then it's even better, like always going on about co-writing, but when I bring these ideas, and you have to be brave to take it to your writing partner. But when I do, you kind of sheepishly, what do you think of this? And they're like, or, oh, that's great. And that goes then on to another level for me. So I don't know, why do we do anything? I mean, the motivation has to be ultimately some sort of reward, whether spiritual or monetary. But I'm still doing this. I don't like the days when I don't think of anything. Yeah, as I said, I'm still working that song file, albeit today it's all kept in a handy little list for me on the phone. And yeah, it's much easier to, I'm not scrabbling through tape cassettes trying to remember that one from 3 months ago. You know, it's just all pretty much laid out. So that my motivation is just, as I say, spirituality, and yeah, that joy of creativity, which I really enjoy doing. And yeah, that's why I still do it.
Thank you, Peter. It's really interesting. It's interesting to hear you kind of categorize different types of your own writing as well. You know, I write commercially and I write personally. And I was just interested, when you wrote Things Can Only Get Better, were you writing personally or commercially?
Yeah, actually, it's funny because I was just writing to try and represent something from a scene that I was part of. So I was just expressing that connection. All the boys and girls of the sort of early club scene were celebrating. And we were just looking for something that was up. And I wasn't even, when it first started, you wouldn't, I mean, I could play you the demo. It's really interesting because it really didn't, it's like a child that hasn't got legs yet. It's toddling around, it's falling down. It just took ages, nearly 3 years to bring together into its known state. And I love nurturing. Some of them, do you want to tell you, I'm sure, some of them can take a long, I mean, Universal Mother on my new album took nearly 15 years until my mum's passing. But others we wrote in 4 days. I'm constantly surprised by that. I mean, we didn't just write it; we wrote it and produced it and recorded it in 4 days. And that's what I find fascinating, because that's still new territory for me. So yeah, it's a wonderful process. And as I say, for me, probably as much spiritual as anything else.
That's lovely. Thank you. I really want to hear Universal Mother. I've had my own songs that have been written over 15 years. Can't wait to hear that one.
Sure.
Can I come to you, Felicity, next, please? And I wonder if, as well as commenting on why you write songs, you might also speak a little bit about the practice of therapeutic songwriting in addition to that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I also think that, you know, when I write personal songs, they're not nearly as good as the songs that I co-write with my patients. I don't know why that is, but I think there is something special about helping people tell their story when they have no way of telling their story themselves. And so when I'm working therapeutically, I get such a buzz out of helping people craft a song that has some kind of meaning for them. That could be giving someone a message, like someone who's dying. They might want to give a message of love and appreciation to a family member, whether it's someone who's got an acquired brain injury, who's trying to make sense of and adjust to the fact that, you know, now I can't walk anymore, but I could a month ago. And how does that, you know, role and identity of that person change? I work with carers, helping them to, carers of people with dementia, helping them to kind of negotiate their change in role, that, you know, I'm no longer a spouse anymore. I'm now caring for this person who used to be my wife or my husband. So there's all sorts of different reasons why people would want to write a song. And I just find that there is a lot of enthusiasm from people wanting to tell their story in a way that's meaningful. They can't. I mean, I'll give you an example. Just imagine you're going to your therapist and you're trying to work on self-affirmation, right? And you want to say things like, you know, I'm a worthwhile person. I'm a miracle, right? You wouldn't just go in there and tell your therapist over and over, I'm a miracle, I'm a miracle, I'm a miracle. But in a song, repetition is power. You get a lot of emotion out of song, and it's appropriate to say that. So I can see I'm completely off topic now, but there's something about that, the power of song to help people say things that they can't say when they have a conversation with people. Personally, on a personal level, I use songwriting often to make sense of things I can't make sense of at the time. If I'm experiencing some kind of internal conflict that I can't put my finger on, I will use that songwriting process to really explore what's going on for me. These are songs I never share with anybody or very rarely. And they, as I said to you, they usually don't sound that great, but they have a purpose for me, and I get a lot out of doing it, and I record them and I keep them for myself. Occasionally I will play them for my family, but not often. And they're personal and they stay with me. And it's like I go through this process, and once I've finished writing the song, it becomes something that I've been through. And then I go, right, I've done that now, and now I'm putting it away. I don't need to revisit it. So I don't know if that's helpful. I guess the other thing too is sometimes I will write a song to send a message to people as well if I want to communicate something. And just to give you an example, and sometimes I do song parodies with my clients, but sometimes I even do it with myself. And last year I turned the wonderful 5-0 in lockdown, and I couldn't have my party, so I decided I would write a song as my kind of thank you speech, and posted it on YouTube and shared it with all my friends. And I wrote it to Alanis Morissette's song "Thank You," and I just said all these thank yous in a song rather than just reading out a speech and posting it on Facebook or on YouTube. So to me that was quite special, and I was able to get my message across, thanking people.
That's great, and thank you. It's very interesting to again hear you talk about the different kinds of songwriting, and I'm so interested in how we categorize these things and where the commonality lies, I suppose, is my area of interest. I wonder if just before I come to Bonnie next, I wonder if Felicity, we could just together, or you could please clarify the definition for therapeutic songwriting, because that's something we spoke a little about when I met you last week. And it is the case that lots of people within the broader community of songwriting, including students, very frequently talk about how they find their songwriting therapeutic. And yet the word therapy does relate, doesn't it, to a particular practice which you're an expert in. And could you just define that for us?
Oh, sure. So I always, I've got my book, the one you talked about before. I don't know if you'd see it, Therapeutic Songwriting. It's quite, I don't just say songwriting, I call it therapeutic songwriting. And that's because the songwriting experience is facilitated by a therapist. It's someone in therapy. It's someone who needs a therapist in order to make that song happen. So it's not self-therapy like I might do when I'm trying to work out what my underlying inner conflicts are. Well, relatively, maybe other people would say differently, but I feel like I'm a relatively well person, and I don't need a therapist to help me to do that. But I work with people who are vulnerable, who might need support in order to make that songwriting experience happen and be meaningful and to get the most out of it. So I use a lot of probing. I might say things like, tell me more about that. And we'll write it down. How could we shape that into a lyric that would be meaningful? And it's things that they can't come up with themselves. I guess when we were having a conversation last week, Sophie, you raised some concerns about some students coming in with quite personal songs and how that might be. I don't know if you want me to say something about that. Is it? Yeah. So we were discussing this, and I was saying to Sophie how, it's one thing for a student to come in and bring in this really confronting song that they've been working on about their own life that might have been extremely therapeutic for them to go through that experience. But there's a safety issue too here. There's a safety issue for all the other students in the room. How are they feeling about hearing this person's song? Music, as we're all musicians, music is extremely powerful. And when you say those words versus when you hear them in a song, it gets right in there. And are you making your students safe? How do you do that? How do you make sure they're prepared in case they're triggered by this song? So there's all sorts of things I think that are important to consider. not to say they shouldn't do it, but there is a difference between having a therapist facilitate something, creating a safe space, knowing what to do when something doesn't go according to plan, because it happens. Sometimes things get raised, and how do you manage that? And a music therapist obviously has professional psychological experiences and training in order to kind of manage that and know how to deal with it when something comes up.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Felicity. I think these discussions are so interesting, particularly, there's a lot of people here today who teach, and it's another part of this kind of crossover and definition of the world of songwriting that I'm interested in. After our discussion, I was drafting an article that I'm writing about why it matters, why we write songs. And I felt very clear when I was talking about a song, which I spoke to you last week, that I wrote about my daughter's death. And I realized, I've really got the difference here, because I wrote the song to talk about my daughter's death quite soon after she died. And it was enormously helpful to me in terms of processing, thinking about my feelings for her. One could even say it was necessary in terms of the grieving process, but it wasn't therapy, because it was not part of a process of therapy, and it really helped me to understand the difference. And I found that very helpful in terms of the way that I interact with my students as well.
And I think just to tap into that, I think that, I don't know you that well, Sophie, but I would say the reason that you were able to do that is because your grief wasn't what we call complicated grief. So there is something we call complicated grief, when people can't move forward and they get stuck in their grief. And that's when therapeutic songwriting with a therapist is useful. You didn't need that. You were able to process it for yourself independently.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because again, I think for those of us who are teaching it's I find it really interesting to get into the kind of to some extent the complexity of what we're dealing with. But I think these conversations are so helpful, and because there is no way to stop students coming to the classroom and writing about their own life story, of course. And so I think learning more about that, that's another reason I think learning more about therapeutic songwriting is so helpful to those of us in education. Thank you. Okay, Bonnie, I'd like to come to you next, if that's okay. Welcome. How nice to see you this morning.
Good to see you, Sophie. Thank you for having me.
May I ask you why you write songs, Bonnie?
Well, good morning, everybody. It's so good to see everybody. It's good to be standing upright at 5 a.m. I wasn't sure that I would see this side of 5 a.m. Such great answers, Felicity. I took some notes here, because in teaching students about songwriting, those are some just really nice gifts to have here, talking about grief and complex grief versus when grief isn't complicated and you're able to access. For me, writing was an oasis that I found as a kid. I grew up in a very small town, very sheltered. I saw my first movie when I was 18 years old. We didn't have a television. I wasn't allowed to listen to radio, but we had a piano. And so as a kid, I was curious about everything, and I really didn't have a lot of things in front of me. I could read books and I could play the piano. And so curiosity is kind of what got me to the piano. And then at that piano, it was a Story and Clark that my parents bought me when I was 5. I found a world sitting there that was absolutely untethered by any reality of my life. And I don't mean it was a bad life. It was just a very, very sheltered life. And in a world today where we all see all things, pretty much kids can see anything on the news on their phones anymore. And I didn't grow up in that environment. And so I found a world that I could step into and I could explore, I could learn. Words just kind of came when I was playing a melody. I'm not a great singer. I just kind of, words and songs just kind of feel right, you know, when you're saying them. And I do think there is a lot in myself that explored who I was as a person, that came from sitting at a piano and just playing over and over. And I love also what you said about repetition. I started, again, like Peter, I started putting little places to record, and I would put it on when I sat down to play, and literally at minute 45 something would kind of, what I call, fall out, and I would know that was where I was headed. When I sat down, that was where I was headed. As soon as it fell out, I would feel the sense of like relief. A lot of times it was angry or sad or happy. There was an emotional response. And so I called this the covering of words, melodies, words that kind of mean something but don't really mean anything. And the further I got into this covering, I would then break into the clearing, and a line would fall out, and I would know that's the song. And a lot of times I would, as soon as I got to that place and I could say it out loud, I usually turn off the recording, go about my day or whatever, and then come back to it. Because a lot of times when I'm too emotional, I can't write it in that moment. I just can't, I don't have the breath or the words to finish it out. But I knew that I got to this very honest piece of lyric, and that I needed to just back out of it and then go back to it at a later time and pick it up again. And as a commercial songwriter, the genesis of writing is different because I need to support myself. So a lot of times it is me connecting with an artist, finding out what their core belief is, and help them to say that. You know, I have written for people, but I've also written a lot with people. Those are two different processes as well. Writing for someone means you are in the room with them and you're listening to their life and to their experiences, where they are in their life. If it's a 22-year-old who's just fallen in love for the first time, that's different than a 32-year-old who's going through a divorce, you know. So writing with those type of people, then writing to be pitched to somebody, I find that I just try to stay as honest as possible. I bring up a song called My Sister that I wrote that Reba McEntire ended up cutting. Literally walking into the writing room that day, I live in Tennessee. My whole family lives in Texas, and after I moved here, you know, you just don't get home as often. And I was very homesick for my sister that day. And the whole song is, the lyric is a phone conversation. Hey girl, it's me. I just called to tell you, you know, hi, call me when you get this. You know, that's how the song starts, because I literally walked into the room that day having just left my sister a message. So for me, the songs that I hold up the best that represent me are the ones that literally are about my absolute life. You know, you just find a way to put it in meter and syllables and rhyme it every once in a while, and hopefully those syllables sound good together. I'm a big believer in, you know, the A-E-I-O-U and how you put those vowels and consonants together to be memorable. You know, a song lyric is different than what I just said to you, because that's forgettable. You want a lyric to like all boil down to some lines that are memorable, that you remember them. So for me, it was curiosity. It was an oasis. It was a place to become a different person. It was a place to live a different kind of life. I could sit at the piano and imagine. It was almost like my portal, you know. It was my place that I sat that took me out of that small town into the rest of the world. And it's still, I spent most of the day sitting in front of a song yesterday, bless you, sitting in front of a song yesterday, and it is still that for me, you know, 30 years later, that I can I can put myself in a different place when I'm in the middle of a song.
Thank you, Bonnie. It's so interesting to hear you talk a little bit as Pete did about, because you both have so much commercial experience and success as songwriters, and thinking about the different types of writing, or maybe not. I just wanted to ask you a little bit more on that, because like Pete, it seems like, I don't know if the song that Reba cut is the song that's made you the most money, but she's certainly, you know, at the time, the biggest artist in the world, right? And it's interesting to me that perhaps your most successful song, one could argue, is one that you wrote very personally. And I was just wondering what you think about that, or do you always just write what comes and then see what happens, or do you sometimes think, oh, I've got to approach this in a commercial way, in a different way? Or
you know, it's interesting. I don't have numbers to know, but I have a kind of an unknown song on a artist named Brantley Gilbert, who's just, you know, he's a country artist out of Nashville here. And I wrote a song on a project with him that probably has made as much, even though it wasn't a single, because it sold a lot of copies. Also, Invisible has made a pretty fair amount. But the Brantley Gilbert song is a song called Saving Amy. And our appointment was at 8 o'clock at night, and he walks in. I had never met him, and he had just had an experience that a friend of his and his girlfriend had a car accident just a couple of days before, and his friend had lost his life, but his friend's girlfriend had survived the crash. And so we wrote the song from the point of view of his friend kind of hovering over the situation, trying to saving Amy. I'll give anything, you know. So it was 8 o'clock at night, which, you know, as you get to know me, you know that I kind of turn into a turtle later in the evening. But as he is telling me his story, everything in my brain just said, open yourself up to how he's feeling. Because sometimes that shuts me down when somebody shares strong emotion, because it's scary to me. It is so freaking scary for strong emotions. Like I can't even speak of losing a child. So to even have that as a passing sentence this morning, I'm like, oh my God, I can't imagine. And so deep emotions to me scare the crap out of me. So I want to run all the way into another room. So I just made myself open and listen to how he was feeling, and try to be honest in our representation of the song, because you don't want to be trying to get people to feel sorry for you. That's not what songwriting is. It is an honest emotional outlay that you're not saying, look at me. What you're saying is, feel this with me. And that's a different thing in a song. Is we're side by side, and I want to feel what you feel. So it's not a feel sorry for me, look at me, I want to be the subject of this. It's more of, I have had this articulate hurt that is just way beyond words. Okay. And I want you to know how I feel so you can feel it with me. And it's a shared grief, I guess you say. So that was a night that I we got done with it and made the work tape. And to be honest with you, I was like, I'll probably never hear the song again. For one thing, it was well over 3 minutes and 30 seconds, which is a no-no in my book. It was 4 minutes long. But this song was on an album, and then he put it on a deluxe package, and it sold a lot of, and to not have been a single, it gets a lot of recognition from his fans, because he's kind of a certain type of artist, and this song is very different for him. It's like one of the few I'm not drinking in a bar songs. It's a very honest representation of a moment in his life when he had this experience that was very overwhelming. So I do believe songs can be these little 3-minute expressions of grief, joy, happiness. How do we put marriage in a 3-minute song? I don't know. We express how we feel about somebody, and it's just a little nanosecond of the joy that we feel when our hearts belong to someone else. And yet we keep trying to write those, all-encompassing songs that, so the other thing I can say, it just came to me, and we can only express a little portion of what the emotion is. We cannot express the whole breadth. That's 20 albums worth of songs. You know what I mean? It's like, if we're trying to write a song that is that deep well of emotion, try to narrow your focus into one little corner of that. Because the more I feel about something, the harder it is to write the song about it. And so a lot of times I just have to narrow myself into one little slice of what the emotion is. Does that answer your question, Sophie?
Yeah, that's really great, Bonnie. Yeah, I mean, we covered some great things there. I think it's so, I personally think that, there is such a huge amount of wisdom within the Nashville community about this relationship between, emotional content and songwriting and connection. And I think nowhere is there more kind of, or they kind of clearer understanding of that. And it's interesting to hear you talk about it. I also want to recommend to everyone the NSAI documentary, It All Begins with a Song. If anybody hasn't seen it, because some of the things you were talking about there gave me that same kind of quality of clear understanding that you get from that documentary. And also, just to mention, I know you're good friends with Mary Gauthier, and just to mention to everybody that she has a book coming out in August called Saved by a Song, which I think is a really great resource as well. So
and
thank
you. For your LGBTQ, Mary and I are both in a film called Invisible, which discusses gay women in the music business. And we had our premiere in San Francisco. We won Best Documentary, and we'll be in LA together August 19th for the LA Outfest. So Mary and I are getting to spend a little time together in the next few months because of this film, which has been just a real joy to be a part of. It's so great to see the stories. So if you're in the LGBTQ writing community, we're trying to show that there are more of us under the surface here, that we may not be out in the public, but we are out, and we're proud of our lives and proud of our partners and kids. And I have an 18-year-old, and it's been a joy to be able to share a film with him, to say this is who I am, and unapologetically. So yes, Mary is a good friend, and the book is well received, and she's having a great year.
That's fantastic. Thank you for mentioning the film. I'll definitely be sharing that with my students, and I know other people on the call might be as well. And That's great work. Congratulations on winning the award, by the way. Thank you for everything. And I'm going to come back to you in a bit. But speaking of, oh yes, Felicity.
I just wanted to respond to one thing from Bonnie, if that's okay, because it's relevant. And I was just thinking, Bonnie, about how you were talking about, you know, the strong emotions and how much, you know, that is what can make a song really powerful, is how when you convey those emotions. And one of the things that I think we forget sometimes about songwriting is it can also express complex emotions. So the lyrics can say one thing and the music can say something else entirely, which is really communicating that this isn't a simple emotion. It's a complex emotion. It's a complex scenario. There's conflict, you know, lyrics and music butting heads all the time. So I just thought I'd sort of mention that as well.
Yeah, I think I love what you're saying, because a lot of times in a kind of almost a dance track, you can have this really kind of deep lyric that you just kind of bop along to, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, there was quite a bit of emotion attached to that. So yes, I agree. Those are some of my favorite songs for sure.
Thank you both. So I want to come to Kit finally before we're going to ask some broader questions. Speaking of commercial writing, Kit's writing in a language that how many people speak Jurai, Kit?
So quick correction, Jerye, how we pronounce it. I think we have, it's hard to say exactly how many native speakers left, but it may be around 300, maybe 3,000 or so that are like myself, kind of learners and relatively fluent. But yeah, very much a small market, we could say, for those that understand the language directly, for sure.
I found it really fascinating to get to know you, and then I met one other person who's, you know, a student who's writing in Basque, although a lot more people speak Basque, but I find it so fascinating, the work that you've done. Would you like to say a bit more about it? And also, could you answer the question, why do you write songs?
Yeah, sure. And thank you so much to everyone. Like, it's been so inspiring. I've been making little notes, and there are definitely connections with everything that you have all said with what I've prepared to say. Another slight little correction, though, I haven't done my Viva Voce exam yet, so technically I'm not a doctor, but I have finished my thesis, and yeah, with any luck, that'll all be fine.
I shall make that up to you by having a drinks party to celebrate when you become one.
I'll take you up on that. Thank you. Excellent. Okay, so with apologies to Sophie and Julian, and perhaps one or two others that might have heard this before, I'm going to riff off of something I've prepared for a similar panel. So as may have been mentioned, I'm a slightly last minute addition here. So hence reworking this. So why do I write songs? Like a lot of folks here over the years, I've written songs for a host of reasons. To make money, for a laugh, to indulge my ego, for therapeutic reasons, to make people dance, to make political statements, and even to rewrite local history and help revitalize an endangered language. But for me, I think ultimately, songs have an especially significant and ancient central purpose, which is for meaningful connection and communion in all the myriad forms that can occur. So combinations of the right words and music in the right context can provide profound, performative, and transformative social experiences of shared affect, consciousness, subjectivity, and identity, breaking down boundaries of self and other. So songs are a truly unique and very particular way of creating and enacting empathetic intersubjective identifications, to borrow a phrase from my doctoral thesis. In other words, to connect with other beings, which can be real or imaginary, human or non-human, co-present or mediated across space and time, or simply an idealized version of the self. We can go on a journey, as we've talked about, exploring and discovering aspects of ourselves. So I write songs because I can, because it's a good thing to do, and because through songs, I can seek those connections with others. You know, and I was really struck by that phrase that Bonnie said, feel this with me. You know, that's empathetic intersubjective identification right there. You know, and all various phrases that have come up this morning, connecting with the scene, being spiritual in some way, to tell stories together, to step into a world, to go through I love this, in that sense of exploration and discovery, to go through the covering and out into the clearing. I love that. So yeah, absolutely. You know, that connection, that empathy really is, in all the myriad ways that occurs, really certainly why I write songs, and I think ultimately what they're about, why they've evolved, and why we can see them in one form or another across pretty much all known human cultures.
Thank you so much, Kit. It's
I didn't talk about my work, which
yeah, so please do. Yeah.
So Jarier is a form of Norman, so it's a Latin-based language, similar in some ways to sort of French, Italian, Spanish, that's evolved in Normandy, North France, but I'm from the British island of Jersey, so we have our own form of Norman, which is called Jarier. Jersey is Jerry. So yeah, so my PhD has been focused around how music can help to safeguard and revitalize endangered language, with a focus on that language. And I've got this band, Badlabec, that sing in Jarier, and also done schools projects and a collaborative sort of community songwriting projects. I've got 12 different local bands and artists to dabble with a bit of Jarier and do a gig, which was amazing. So that's really the basis of my work, which is now ongoing. I've got some other irons in the fire moving forwards, but yeah, there's a new commission now from Jersey government to do some new work, which is really exciting. It's going to happen by the end of the year. So that's essentially my main sort of research and practice focus, along with, yeah, I'm very privileged to be working at ICMP, loving that. I'm very excited about this new module. So great to be here and be with you guys. Thank you all.
With Kit, with the work that you've done so far on Jersey, is there anything in particular that are there any sort of particular moments or particular experiences that you had when you were working with different people writing songs? Is there any kind of particular thing that came out of the project that we might hear about, that struck you, or that was important or surprising? Or
Sure, so many things, but I think one of perhaps the loveliest moments, which I was managed to get a little bit of on camera, was in this collaborative songwriting project, which I was essentially just curating, you know, getting local, mostly younger musicians who pretty much didn't speak any Jarier or had very little Jarier, to work with Jarier speakers who are now, you know, given the situation, mostly sort of post 60, 70, 80, 90 years old, so not having more children, and there is that intergenerational link that's been broken, sadly. So to put them in a room and see them writing a song together was just a beautiful thing. And, you know, and I've got this one that comes to mind of this young band that was 3 17-year-old girls writing a song with an 82-year-old woman, Jarier speaker. Just beautiful, really, really magical to see that, to see that through and see that performance happen in the end. You know, one of the things that came from that was just the vision of seeing these young women performing in that way, gave us a real, all the audience, and, you know, those who will, you know, see the video or whatever, can get a real sense of what it would be like if our young folks really could speak and express themselves and express something meaningful in this language again, and what that could do for us as a culture and as a community. So it's really giving that sort of very real affective experience, as well as, you know, psychological, cultural experience, as really, you know, an embodied experience that's also so meaningful. And that was magic.
Yeah, thank you, Kit. I saw that video and I recommend it to others. I was really struck by seeing the elderly woman and the 3 girls writing together, how it was like watching any co-writing session. They were all so involved in the song, you know, and Absolutely. To see the elderly woman, she really wanted them to craft the syllables to the melody correctly and get the message across. And I thought that was so touching.
So nice.
Right, thank you, everybody. We're just going to talk for another 5 minutes or so before we do have a very short break, and then we go to questions from the floor. Because I mean, I have a ton more questions, but I'm sure everybody else does as well. And I'd like everybody else to have a chance, and we will do that by means of the chat after the break. I'll sort of curate, but so get ready to type in the chat if you've got questions after our break. But before we do, I wonder if I could ask the panel to all of you, open question, and then raise your hand if you know, when you're ready to say something, just about the opportunity that song presents. And I'm quite interested in, you know, a lot of the things that we're talking about in terms of connection and therapeutic applications and so on are presented by all types of art forms. Something that really struck me when I was reading therapeutic songwriting, because this is quite a few of the projects that I've been very interested in recently have been about connection with equality, really, and giving voice to people who don't have a voice. And this is from Felicity's book. Songwriting serves to give the songwriter a voice and to feel empowered to tell his story. Society has condoned the use of songs as a form of freedom of speech, where people can describe what might otherwise be considered taboo. And that resonated with me with my project that was all to do with the baby loss community. And I've had students who've written done big songwriting projects about all sorts of things to do with identity or mental health or their own experiences. Again, not therapeutic projects, but this theme of giving a voice. And for me, that quote really sums up the opportunity that song presents. And I wondered if we could hear from anybody about what is particular to song, and the form of song and songwriting in terms of the opportunity that it presents us with. Julian, thank you.
So the phrase "window on a world" comes back. Is that kind of? I've been so impressed and really moved by how people have responded to this question today, and I feel that this is incredibly rich, fertile ground that's been discussed. And so I'm just very struck by the term connection, which comes back time and time again, but how that's created is such an effective and efficient means, I think, is something very peculiar to song. So, for example, Dance Me to the End of Love, Leonard Cohen, which gets into perhaps one of the most impossible things to actually be with for most people, for perhaps, well, literally for most people, which is the experience of the gas chambers in the Holocaust. Now, it's like to try and explore that in 4 minutes. One may think, you know, come on, but somehow something is evoked, and I really like that word, evocation. It's interesting. The more I think about it, the less songwriting is about, as it were, self-expression, and the more it is about connection. And that feels kind of contradictory, but I absolutely love what you said, Bonnie, about kind of standing in bearing witness to experience and evoking that it's not about me, it's about the experience. And for me personally, the opportunity is progressively about being with what I can't be with. And again, referring back to Bonnie, what you said about, you know, we only have a little slice of experience to refer to. I so agree. But I've recently been very, very moved and touched, engaging with the work of Gabor Mate and his work on trauma, and his kind of suggestion that actually trauma is so hugely widespread throughout all of our lives in different ways.
In the realm of the hungry ghosts.
What can I not be with that I can explore and open to? That for me is a particular opportunity.
Peter, did you want to come in on that?
Well, I'm feeling a connection because I picked up on Gabor recently. As an adopted child brought up in the 1960s in Ireland, I was put in mother and baby homes. I've been looking into this for a long time, what motivates me, what makes me an addictive person. And I came across Gabor Mate, and he talks about, I think it's a Buddhist principle of the realm of the hungry ghosts. And he talks about being a Jewish child in Poland in the 1950s when the Germans walked in there. And he says that his mother couldn't placate him. The doctors told him to verbalize the kid, but the kids just kept crying. And she rang the doctor saying, I don't know what's wrong with my little Gabor. And he says, all my Jewish babies are crying. And then he realized later on that the tension and the absolute fear that was in the air, palpable, was going from the mothers into the babies. So it began his journey of understanding what made him later on, as he says, he was addicted to classical music. But I'm trying to understand that myself. And there's a big thing for me here in Northern Ireland about a program I might be working on about mother and baby homes, because I think the trauma in Irish society, it has been going on for a very long time, and it's been passed on from generation to generation. So yeah, I'm very interested, and I'm blown away by that, because I thought Gabor was very much a niche thing. So I'm pleased to hear that.
That is interesting to make that connection, Pete. And I want to come to Felicity next, who's got a hand up, but I just want to say, Bonnie, that this whole conversation puts me in mind of our late friend Ralph Murphy's very amusing, gentle, but caring way of saying that the best songwriters are people who've experienced great difficulty. And, you know, for anybody who hasn't read Ralph's book, Murphy's Laws of Songwriting, because of the way that Ralph used to express himself, I think it's often, he and his work have been a little bit underrated. And I loved seeing the reference to it in Mary's forthcoming book. And Ralph was always making a connection between people who'd suffered and then their ability to funnel that and to connect through commercial songwriting. Felicity.
That's a really great segue for what I was going to say anyway, Sophie, that, you know, this idea of people who've experienced trauma writing great songs. And that's why I opened up by saying, you know, the songs I write with my clients are much better than the songs I write by myself, because I don't really have I haven't had a lot of trauma in my life. I've been very lucky in that way. Hence my songs are not as good as their songs. But I was also thinking, you know, you talked about what the opportunities are, and you know, I'm always working with vulnerable people, and a lot of vulnerable people are often stigmatized and experience all sorts of discrimination of various kinds. And one of the things that I really enjoy about writing songs with people who are disadvantaged in some way is that it gives them a chance to show other people what they're actually capable of. And just to give you one example, I talked about this with you last week. I was interviewing a music therapist in Brisbane, actually, who'd been working with adolescents who were on the autism spectrum. And there was this one young 16-year-old who decided to write a song about what's it like to be a 16-year-old with autism, and basically told the story of, sent a message to all the autism experts that you have no idea. You talk about things that you think you know, but you don't know what it's actually like to be someone with autism. And actually, he sent that song to Tony Atwood, who's a big UK guru in autism, saying, you know, don't think you know about what it is like for us. And so it was giving, you know, showing what he was capable of that people didn't think he was capable of doing, which is expressing his emotion. And expressing his views on things. So I think, you know, it gives people a chance to show what they're capable of when people sometimes don't give them the time of day to share that and to share themselves with the world.
Well, I'm muted. I just got the little message. That's a wonderful set of connections to make there. What fascinating discussion. It's 12:10, so I'm going to have a break so everybody can refresh themselves just for a couple of minutes. Let's be precise, shall we? It is 12:09. Let's meet back here at 12:12, which gives us 3 minutes, and then I will facilitate questions and comments from the floor via the chat. Thank you. Okay, nice to see friends and students and colleagues from teaching and songwriting on the call. I just mentioned in the chat that it'd be great if you want to unmute and come on camera to ask a question. I just anticipate there might be quite a few, and so I'll sort of choose. So I you know, who's going to speak rather than via the hands up, so I can keep an eye on what people are typing in the chat bar. I have questions as well, but if you do have a question or a point you want to make or something you want to discuss with one of the panel, please pop it in the chat. Also to note that Bonnie's very generously said if anybody'd like to connect, it can drop a message there. I'd like to add myself that I'd love to hear from you, and I'll put my email in the chat if anybody wants to get in touch to tell me why they write songs, or are particularly interested in hearing about unusual stories and motivations for songwriting. I'm trying to collect those at the moment, so particularly interested to hear about those, and I know Kit is as well. Does anybody have a question? And oh, thank you, Felicity. Yeah, there's Felicity's email address. I'll pop mine. Great, we've got lots of questions coming in now. John Meldrum, I think you were just saying hello. If you do have a question, pop it in the chat and I'll come back to you. And then I'll go in order. Mo, Mo Cohen, who I know is on the call, would you like to ask your question? Shall I ask it for you?
Happy to ask it.
Thanks.
Hi, Mo.
I was just wondering what you all think separates or distinguishes songwriting as an activity from other forms of artistic self-expression. I'm a practitioner of solo autobiographical theatre and autobiographical performance, and I've made a list this morning of all the reasons that you've suggested that songwriting, reasons for writing songwriting, and every single one of them could be attributed to another form. So what is it that has songwriting stand out and separate it from any other?
Panel, raise your hand if you have a response, please. Thank you, Felicity.
I'll have a crack. How's that? Do you have that expression? I was thinking about this just as you were talking. Is it Mo? Is that how you pronounce your name? I wonder, because I've often thought this myself when I'm crafting lyrics with my clients. I think, well, what is the music adding to this? Why can't we just write this in a creative story or just as a poem? And I do think that there is something about pairing the music with the lyrics that gives it more power than them separated. As, like it's bigger than what's the expression? It's bigger than the sum of its parts, right? And I don't think you get that from any other art form. And the other thing too is all the other art forms, like there's drama, dance, or visual art. To create that, you actually need to physically do something. You've got to move to dance. You have to use your arm to paint. I'm just thinking that, and drama too, you're often moving your body. You don't need to move to write a song. You can be in bed, paralyzed from the neck down, and you can still create a song. No, I think that's important. It's an important distinction that it doesn't require a physical ability. Just one.
Yeah, I want to add Felicity, and I don't know if Julian's got something on this, but when we were talking last week, there was a moment in our discussion that really, what's the word? It was like a light bulb for me when I was telling you a story about my song I spoke about earlier for my daughter, and I told you the story about playing that at the Houses of Commons with an MP, a really very inspiring, powerful woman, and that she was in tears listening to the song. And I was telling you the story, and you said to me, oh, well, I can tell you exactly why that happened. And then you talked to me about a little bit about, your knowledge about music and the connections of music and the brain. And it really interested me. And I, as somebody who's more interested in crafting lyrics than music, I craft both, but I'm more interested in lyrics. I often overlook that slightly. Julian.
Yeah, well, just to add to what both of you are saying, I again, my favourite word that you and I have often discussed, which Lauren Hooper would have already known, I'm just about to say, which is congruence, which is when it's that extraordinary way where lyric and music work together to evoke something which, as you said, Felicity, is greater than the sum of the parts. And I do think that's very, very remarkable. Leonard Bernstein is great in his Harvard lectures. He's fabulous talking about that, about the opportunity of lyric or libretto working with music across genre. And it doesn't matter what the genre is. And I would add, though, I think that it's kind of a question of also of preference. Like we know from our that very interesting word ekphrasis, you know, that different art forms can work with the same material in different ways to express different optionalities in how something is explored. I think that's very interesting too. So I think that largely it's in my own case, it's because it's what I can do. You know, I love working with music, and I'm very interested in ideas and text. If I was a playwright, I'm sure I'd be interested in similar things, but I'd be doing it a different way.
Thank you. Kit?
Yeah, so yeah, really agree with all that, and want to add that to the idea that sure, we don't need to necessarily move to write a song. You can lie in bed and be working on a song, but nevertheless it is an embodied experience, and I think therefore the role of the voice is crucial to what's unique about it. So you know, even in a very sort of basic way, the way that we respond affectively to a voice, to a human voice, is so ancient and so directly works on us in a kind of I think the word is pre-reflective way. So before we can even really analyze it, our mirror neuron systems, etc., are responding to that voice and the affect, the emotion in that voice. And so I think that's one aspect of what marks songs out when they're put into music that provides that context, that extra affective context that makes it very special. And sure, different kinds of aesthetic experiences, like Julian says, you know, provides us a different, perhaps different window on that experience. And indeed, linking song to experience, other forms of aesthetic expression experiences has its own power. I'm working with a very interesting collaboration at the minute with a visual artist who's undergone a brain trauma. So we're creating an installation to reflect, because we've got the whole journey of her recovery, pre-operation sketchbooks and post-operation sketchbooks. We're creating this installation with some music and sound involved with that. So that combination will provide a unique window into that experience. But nevertheless, yeah, it's that voice, I think, which is very crucial, and that how that marries with music really is what makes songs special.
That's so interesting, Kit. I want to come to Felicity now, but Julian and I were talking about that last week. I said, why is it that I can listen to, for example, Simple Love by Alison Krauss, but if I start singing with her, I cry? Felicity?
Exactly, Sophie and Kit. That's just, I forgot totally about the power of the voice. And, you know, it's often with the clients I've worked with, it's actually not until they sing their song for the first time that it comes together emotionally for them, and you can hear it in the tone of their voice. They choke up, they become overwhelmed, and it's when they voice their own story paired with music that it becomes really powerful, which I don't think you can do with other art forms. And that's because we know that music has that capacity to be quite widely distributed in our brain. It links emotion, it links cognition, it links memory. So, you know, all the songs that we have from our youth, when we hear them, they stimulate our autobiographical recall, and that has attached with it feelings. And that's something that I don't believe other art forms can offer. I think music can do it quite generally, but songs have a greater power because it's often shared with other people. We often listen to songs and enjoy songs in a social context, and usually in a happy context, whether it's a Christmas party or whatever, and that helps lay down positive memories, and then those songs stimulate those memories. I'll stop talking.
No, that's great. This is really fascinating. This is where I see so many parallels across all of these different types of songwriting, which are interesting. Right, let's go to another question. Paul Long, is this our Paul Long from ICMP? Would you like to come on camera and just ask your question?
I can do. Can you hear me?
Oh, it's another Paul Long. Hello, nice to meet you.
It's a different Paul Long. Sorry.
Go for it.
Yeah, I thought you might want to pass by this, but it is an integral aspect of my interest in songwriting. So I'm posing the opposite of your question, which is, why do you not write songs? And this is a way of trying to explore how the panel encounter or deal with impediments or challenges to their processes, the inspiration and joy that they've described. On one level, I felt it was a stupid question when I reflected on what Peter said about, he said I think his neurons were geared towards just writing songs, waking up at night. But you've covered issues of, commerce and the personal, and sometimes songwriters encounter, I don't know if writer's block is the right word, but trying to get over blockages, inspiration, or just how the process works when they're not inspired is key here.
Sophie, can I take Paul up on this? This is really important to me because I've spent a lifetime hammering away at writing songs and even writing when I shouldn't be writing. Paul, I've got this picture now. Musicians play. You can only play when you're in a childlike state. You cannot play or be inspired when you're getting divorced and you're being chucked out of your house and the lawyers are coming after you and you're in that black space. There was nothing left of my childlike play there. Maybe, I'm hearing others talk about going into therapy and stuff. That comes after the initial hit of this thing. It's just too powerful to overcome. So you have to leave it and you have to just deal with real life, if you know what I mean. I've had that happened to me over several times in my life where I was going through, major changes, and the last thing I was doing was picking up the guitar. I was just dealing with, getting food on the table in some instances, or just finding a place to live. So that's how I see it. So it's a really, really good question because I've now learned not to force it if it ain't there, and to be kind of in that good space with a bit of hope in my heart, or at least something I feel like I'm ready to express. But there's no point sitting there. But it's a terrible expression, but flogging a dead horse, if that makes any sense. I'm too far down. So yeah, that would be my take on that, Paul.
Anyone else on the panel want to comment on this? Or Paul, did you want to come back or ask a bit more? Or
no, I feel like it feels like one of those questions that just kills people dead. But I think those mechanisms that people have considered or gotten over are key here, and it's important. It's because I've come with an agenda. It's something I'm thinking about at the moment, and I can imagine for those who write songs for a living, the spectre of lacking inspiration or effort, or even as Peter said, the intercession of life. Detracting is a real challenge. There's
another book I really recommend. I don't know if you've read Resistance by Tori Amos that came out in 2020, Paul, but there's quite a lot of wisdom from her about this and about her take on what others may refer to as writer's block. I think you'd find that interesting.
Super. Thank you.
Julian. Julian, you're muted, or were you just ordering a coffee there?
I was ordering a coffee, and now I've just come back. So sorry. Just another book, The War of Art, that I found extremely successful well, for myself. I'm sure he wrote it just for me, but also that it's wonderful on resistance. And can I remember the name of the author right now? Just gone out of my brain. No, but you should just Google The War of Art. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean the other one I'd really recommend, Paul, is Elizabeth Gilbert. She's a novelist. She wrote a great book called Big Magic, which is all about this as well. I mean, it's very much about the relationship between commerciality and inspiration, but it's the whole same sort of area. Stephen Pressfield, who wrote The War of Art.
Stephen Pressfield. Exactly.
Right, question from Oscar Jensen that he'd like me to read out for the panel. My sense is that very few people write music and lyrics simultaneously in this composite and often collaborative medium. How far do any of you think the songwriter's primary motivations might correspond to the categories of music first or lyric first writing? Are lyricists likelier to write for reason X and musicians likelier to write for reason Y, and so on? voice seems to be important here, but it might be too reductive to associate the self-expression of voice entirely with the lyrics first side of things. Interesting. So I suppose we're sort of delving a bit deeper into the question before last about what song has to offer. Does anybody have a view on that? I mean, Julian, do you write lyrics, Julian? I wonder if you've got an interesting take on this.
Help it. I absolutely love lyrics, and but what I've always worked in partnerships when I've written songs, which I've always enormously enjoyed. But what I'm doing now is, certainly in the moment, is setting poetry that particularly inspires me, and particularly which is delving into areas which, again, that just kind of call me to explore and just see how and in what way music can work with that. So I've just done a spoken word piece, which is coming out in a few weeks' time, which is the first time a spoken word and track piece. And other than that, I've been doing either reimaginations of poetry, like a dance film I just made, and then setting text. So that's what I'm choosing to do. But I'm very, very happy to work with lyricists as well. It's a great opportunity.
Anyone else on the panel want to comment on? Yeah, Bonnie, thank you.
That's a great question, and I was just thinking, this is a very generalization. We talked about ego being part of the, train that pushes someone to write songs. And I think a lot of times I find a guitar player that has like a new riff and they want to write a song because they just learned a new riff, that a musician coming into a writing session, it might be a little bit of ego that drives them. Like, I want to show you this new thing I just learned. Someone coming in with a lyric, which I had never thought about this, they have something they want to express on an emotional level lyrically, whereas musical a lot of times feels more like the overarching reason to write a song, and lyric feels like a more personal, interconnected, and I don't know if I'm making any sense at all, but when we were speaking of the different reasons why we write a song, Peter's the one that said, ego, or, connection, whatever. So I do think that different people bring different things into the room as to why they're there. And the biggest thing, back to the war of art, is just sit down and write. Sometimes it's inspiration. Sometimes it feels more like perspiration because you're just working hard at it. But I have a saying in my world here, a bad day of writing is still a good day for me. Even when I sit down and I feel like I'm forcing it a little bit. And Peter, I totally understand all of your stuff is in a bag, and you're having to find somewhere to live, and the last thing you want to do is to write a song. But I have found in some of those moments when my guard is down because I'm just battling so many things, that a lot of times I become very honest. I think because of the way I grew up, I found a way to couch everything, how to not say what I felt, but kind of say what I feel, like that multi-layered, how are you doing? I'm fine, right?
Classic.
What I mean is, I have no money for rent and I'm having to find a place to live, and my car is broken down, and they need $80 in a parking ticket. That's what I'm fine means.
Bonnie, I think we're writing a song here.
So I found through the years, just showing up to the empty page, like on a consistent, persistent basis, brought me a lot of comfort and joy, even on those days when it wasn't like the most inspired lyric, because it just gave me a place to go. So for those of you that are maybe trying to figure out why you're writing songs, some days don't figure it out. Just sit down and write a song, and you may really, really surprise yourself. Those are the days I love, is when I'm going into it feeling less than inspired. And then by 4 or 5 o'clock in the day, I'm like, oh my God, I now know why I sat down today. And I love to surprise myself. You know, I love for something to come out of nothing, because let's also talk on a very spiritual level. You start with nothing, and at the end of the day, you have something. That is creation. That is the magical thing called creation that we will never define in our lifetimes. I am always extremely grateful to the universe for giving me those moments of sheer magic that I have no idea where it came from. And yet, by the end of the day, I have words and music on a piece of paper that I did not have at the beginning of the day, you know. And if you look at any, you know, spiritual book in the world that's ever been written, in the beginning was the word. You know, it's just, magic happens when things come from nothing into something. So sit down at the paper every day or every 2 days or whatever your, you know, whatever your routine is, and surprise yourself.
This is great conversation. Peter, do you want to come in?
It's only dawned on me as well. I mean, that's absolutely a great insight there. I was thinking, back in my mind, I was struck by what Lennon said to McCartney. Shall we write another swimming pool? If you want to know about motivate, they're just playing with it, obviously. But then, actually, I mean, if I tell you the first thing I wanted to do when I wrote songs, when I was 15 and in my first band, I wanted to be a show-off. I was a real people pleaser. I wanted to be an entertainer. Those were my first motivations. I've gone way past that. And like I say, you know, the black belts, I've gone up those again, and I'm coming back around again and I want to show off. I suppose maybe we visit all of those in some element at any point, given our sort of our psyche. And that's where we're at. You know, your mental state. If you're in a good place or a bad place, you're not gonna write a heavy song, I think, when you're in a really good place. I don't remember doing that. But yeah, I mean, definitely. And I think also, if you look back to Dr. Gabor Nate, I've begun to realize that part of the people pleasing I've had comes from wanting not to be rejected as a child, having been adopted. And then so you create this kind of bubble of I've got some tricks, I pull tricks, so you keep me, right? And that brings you into that whole thing. I've begun to understand a lot of this thing. So you talk about childhood trauma and stuff like that. So I know a lot about the motivations for stuff, but that doesn't mean I don't enjoy doing it, or I would stop doing it now that I understand it. I'm still compelled. And as I said, I'm in a very good place now. You know, I've moved back to Ireland from England after being there for 30 years, and have come. You guys are going to love this. I'm going to tell you. Just down the road from me is where the captain of a slave ship was. He was caught in a storm. He survived, and he went and wrote Amazing Grace. And just up the road from me in Fawn was a lady who wrote Once in Royal David City because she was so religious. And Phil Coulter was here, and he wrote My Boy for Elvis and the Bay City Rollers. He's written A Town I Love So Well. He's a major international writer, and he's just down the road in Buncrana. And I'm just beginning to realize that the sort of legacy that's around here, and it must be something in the water, because I've been inspired to write like never before. So I'm just saying, I'm writing from just being at a good place, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's great. And you should also put a word in for the other book that we like, which is The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. I think Elizabeth Gilbert's book, she's not a songwriter, obviously, but she really helps us make sense of the idea of the tortured artist, and not sort of, what's the word, not kind of sort of, celebrating that too much, leaning away from feeling that one has to be a tortured artist, but also being able to accept and give life to the stories. And I think that's quite an important distinction that she does really well in her book. Right, we've got more questions here. Mike Rawlins, would you like to ask your question about identity?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for today. It's been fantastic. Just very quickly, I know for myself that the reason I've started writing songs quite late in life is very much tied up with thoughts of who am I and why am I here. Even if I don't know what the answers to those things are, it's part of exploring those questions. So I wondered to what extent identity and purpose are part of the panel's reasons for writing. And as Peter, something you just said struck a chord with me. Again, I've discovered quite late in life that I like standing in front of people and singing at them. So songwriting for me is in part to give me things to sing at people. And so that the question of the songwriter moving on to be the song performer is also interesting as well. So identity and purpose, is that important for you?
Yeah, sorry, I was just... Peter, do you want to go first? Yeah.
It's very easy. Look, I can sing, I write, I play, I do all of these things. I don't differentiate between them too much. I do the lyric and the melody at the same time. Sophie will tell you I can try and write a record in the same day. It's just, I've got to that stage where, as you say, put them in front of people. But someone mentioned earlier on about looking for someone to identify with. So you make this expression, you just want to connect to people. And so we make a chorus so people can sing along. They get entertained. That's that kind of thing. And then sometimes, there's a complete hush in the hall when you've expressed something that just brings tears to people's eyes. That's a wonderful process. I mean, anyone who stands on a stage has a light on them. They're already in that zone, where they're either showing off or they're exploring their own creativity and looking for that identification with others, to really connect. And that's a wonderful process. You connected with yourself to write. You're going to connect with others once you put it out there, and you have to be brave enough to put it out there, because I've seen people like Heather Small from M People being sick beside the stage before she goes on because of the stage fright, but something still puts her up on that stage, something good.
Thank you, Peter. Kit, identity and purpose.
Yeah, so central theme of my thesis for sure, and in particular, so the question, of course, all identities to some extent are worked out in process in some kind of way socially, and that can be very true for us individually as writers and as artists going through different things. But in my case, working with Jerrier, it's very much I'm connecting with the idea on a collective level, trying to rework and renegotiate cultural identity across an entire community of 105,000 people to say, hey, this language is part of, has been part of who we are. If we don't do something about it now, it'll go, and we'll lose that chance perhaps forever. So music and song has been one of the ways that we've been working, negotiating and reconnecting with that sense of collective identity, which is an absolutely fascinating process. And it's definitely, it's a long journey, but as my thesis really shown that there's been a great response, and it's definitely been a powerful mode of engaging with that identity process collectively. Yes, it's a really, really special thing.
Thank you. Yeah, I really like the word purpose as well, sense of purpose and creative purpose. Can I come to Felicity?
Yes, and definitely, just like Kit, a lot of the work that I do with people is core, is identity work. Who am I? People who've gone through various traumas and things, they're trying to discover and reconnect with the sense of self. But, on the cover of my book, I have a picture of a microphone. And that was a very intentional decision, because it's about songwriting, and yet there's a picture of a microphone there. And, my thinking around that is that we've talked a lot about creating lyrics and creating music. We haven't talked at all about the production of music either, and creating the sound. Right. And, I've got my little boom speaker here. If you can just imagine, that's a microphone, right? When I'm singing into the microphone, it says something about me. But if I'm singing like this, it says something totally different about me. And if I add a bit of reverb into it, it says something different again. It's like blurring the sound. It's not crisp and clean if there's a lot of reverb. And that's saying, I'm not necessarily ready to own this yet. I want it to be a bit blurred. I don't want you to be hearing me so precisely, right? So there's a lot of things around our identity just in the way we produce the music, not just about creating it.
Yeah, that's great.
Like Simon Frith has written like the classic sort of music and identity piece, just to say, if folks want to read that, going back to 96. And other folks since, Diodonora, Martin Stokes, lots of folks written about those particular ways that aspects of sound and movements, gesture in music really do work and give us opportunities to work and perform those meanings to ourselves and engage and enact our identities through them. Yeah, it's such a wonderful and unique thing, I think, to song in a lot of ways.
Right, thank you. Julian. You're muted, Julian.
I'm so sorry. I've been trying to remember to mute myself between, and then I forget to unmute myself. Yeah, so a slightly contradictory thing. One is that I feel that the more that I do this, the less, in one way, the less idea I have about who I am and what my purpose is. And that's very liberating. It started off with something which is much more kind of fixed and certain, and something to prove, something to show, something to demonstrate, a more kind of ego-orientated idea of, you know, self-expression and wanting to be noticed and seen, and people recognizing a lot in your wonderful description of that for myself. But so less and less of an idea. On the other hand, I noticed that in some way, I feel I've been writing the same piece ever since I started, and that there are themes which connect, particularly themes of opposites, how to bring things together. So that I'm interested in that, but I've only seen that through the exploration of actually producing work, and then thinking, gosh, yeah, there's all these, there is a kind of, and I noticed this with other composers and with authors and people, they kind of write the same work over and over again. And I'm very interested in that.
That is interesting. I saw Felicity nodding. I don't know if you've got something to add, but I sometimes come across that with students in the room where they come to me and they say, well, look, I've written this song and that song, but then I've been told that this one is a bit too much like that one and I've got to write something happy or whatever. And I'll say, no, first of all, write what you like. But second of all, there are so many artists that just kept writing the same thing until they got it right. As far as I'm aware, you know, you're not an internationally famous songwriter. Not that that's my measure of success, by the way, and I wouldn't say that to a student. But my point here is, why not write the same song 1,000 times till you feel you've done it? It may be the one that becomes very successful to you financially, if that is your goal, but it might also be simply the thing that you're trying to do.
Or, just to add in, Sophie, it may be, sorry, Felicity, it may be that it's never to be completed, you know, that there isn't a final iteration which is there.
Brilliant.
Or conversely to that, it could mean that you're stuck. I'm not talking about stuck musically. I'm talking about in your journey.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah. Oh, right, okay. So got a couple, thank you. This is fascinating. A couple more questions we've got, and I want to try and pick up on a couple of other things that have been mentioned before we wrap up. Angela, would you like to ask your question?
Of course, Sophie. Hi. You and I went to a seminar a couple of months back with Andrew H. Miller on the road less travelled. And it was the idea that we're one person with one life, and choices and chances have meant that we are who we are, where we are, doing the things that we're doing. And maybe, I don't know, maybe it's just because I got a kind of an acting background back in the day, but I'm quite interested in this notion of who am I not? Who might I have been had I had some other choices? And the kind of flirting with living some of those unlived lives. And I'm curious to know what the panel's thoughts are on that. Do you write sometimes to be who you are not? Maybe to process and come to terms with the fact that we are this and not the other things we could have been.
Fantastic question. Who would like to?
I've got an answer
Peter,
for that.
Yeah.
As a father, I mean, yeah, I have done. I know that Mark Knopfler and Sting tend to write from a fictitious point of view, as inhabiting sort of other characters, looking down upon scenarios. And not that I did it consciously, but there was some stuff that came to me that I could never put into Ream because it's just way too out there. And so I didn't pick like an alter ego or anything like Ziggy Stardust, but I went ahead with them anyway. And I think one of the songs is called Headlights, and it's about someone digging the grave of a child that they've interfered with, and he goes, the headlights on a dark night on the forest, where she like, then ends up going, oh, my God, what have I done? Am I still my mother's son under these headlights? And I don't know where it came from, because it just absolutely disturbs me. I don't even know anywhere I can put it. I can't even express these things. But when these songs happen, you go down this area, and I kind of had to follow it in a perverse kind of way to find out what this felt, what that was like. And as a parent, a father, the absolute horror of it, where does that come from? I really don't know. And why would I do it? Because I'm not known as a dark artist, do you know what I mean? Or someone who's like a goth or whatever, whatever that means. But so I had to inhabit almost a different personality there to be able to finish this. Will it ever see the light of day? I don't know. I'm developing some stuff that's making me think outside of my band Ream. I'm looking at maybe doing a haunted house play. I don't know. I'm looking at that, and maybe this might work there. But you know the way you've got all these sort of little outside projects bouncing around, thinking, so I'll go that way or that way. In that instance, the muse just took me to a place that I don't know if it's even worth sharing, to be honest. But yeah, it's just I did do that. I have done it, and I must say, in this instance, it's still a bit creepy.
Thank you. That's great, Peter. Thank you for sharing. Is there anybody else on the panel who wants to pick up on this idea of unlived lives and being someone else? And Bonnie?
That's a great question, Angela. And actually, I feel like I need to explore that. I think I have found such identity in what I have experienced and the lived experiences that I've been through, which are very narrow and very specific. And I have never been great at the life I didn't live and writing about that character. And it's actually something I would, 25, 30 years into a writing career, it's like, here's a whole nother hallway that I could, explore. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think my safety has become discussing what I do know a little bit about, even though I think emotions are very mysterious. I would love to push myself into the space of like becoming another character. Maybe I'm skinny. Maybe I am very confident. Maybe I wear clothes very well. Maybe my hair is not a mess all the time. Maybe there's this person that I could create in a song or in a group of songs that I don't identify with. And I'm going to take that on as a challenge for this next year, because it's been right there in my brain. And then when you brought that question up, and one of the things I wanted to drop in here, I find for myself that I have an 18-year-old, which I mentioned. I find that I am also writing to leave something behind. Like my copyrights are lifetime plus 75 years. So my kid may not remember how I made their breakfast exactly the way they wanted to every day. But in 50 years, I hope they will pull out a song, So.
That's lovely, Bonnie. I'm sure they will. And also they'll benefit more financially than my kids will. Particularly because all the money I made so far I've given to charity, which is quite foolish and obtuse of me. Okay, digressing a bit. I've got a couple more questions. This is slightly off topic, but we do.
Felicity's hand is still up.
Oh, Felicity, sorry.
It's just a quick comment to what Bonnie was saying. It's kind of like legacy work in a way that, and I think you're talking about it from perhaps a more monetary perspective, but I think people can also create songs as legacies for other people that don't have any financial value, but have more personal meaning than just being financial.
Well, to be fair, with streaming, I'm not sure how financially my child is going to benefit from my work. I've seen my work be worth 100th of what it was worth 8 years ago. So, you know, I'm not sure we're heading in the direction that is going to be financially feasible for anyone to be a full-time songwriter. So,
we do have a question about money. Just a couple of minutes on this, because it's not really on topic, but I want to give Ben Benson the opportunity because he might be researching on this. And he's asking, we see an unfortunate number of song share disputes. How do panelists approach the thorny subject, and when in the collaborative process are songwriting shares raised? So particularly Pete or Bonnie, do you have anything to say about song share disputes?
I haven't had one as yet, other than I was going to take Robbie Williams on for his version of my song, Let Me Entertain You. The only restrictive trade I've suffered is that when I sing mine live, people think I'm doing his, even though mine predates his by a year. Our new management have connections to the lawyer that fought the Robin Thicke case in America and won, and we're currently trying to see if we can get the case tried there, because that's retrospectively back to record one, as opposed to England, which, rather being England, has got a stupid system of 6 years retrospectively. It's not a right that I'm comfortable of setting. It's not a wrong that I'm comfortable setting to rights. It's just something on the back burner. I'm too busy getting a new album together, and I've been in court 3 times in my life over people claiming that they've written my songs, and it's not a good place to be. It's quite negative. It's very draining. And can I just say that, having kept the song file, when we did Discovery with the Chambers, they said no one's ever kept a record like this, and I was able to make 3 songwriting disputes go away because of my meticulous filing of my song ideas as I went with dates. No one had done that. So that's been my experience of it. You're gonna have it because you're putting it out there. You're always, there's a vulnerability there to sharing with people, and you know, you have to have that trust. Massive majority of songwriters are really honorable and will work out a deal with you. Mostly it's 50-50, but if it's my drummer and we've written a song just because I've been jamming, we've worked out 12.5% with him. He seems happy with that. So these things are open for discussion. You need to do it on the Broadway, but it's the very rare occasions that, you know, you have to have yourself covered.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I knew you'd had experience, and thank you for sharing that. Ben, I don't know if you're researching or you're just sort of looking for some business type advice on this, but the NSAI website, National Songwriters Association International, has got lots of good videos, and there are other resources. Bonnie, you're nodding.
Keeping meticulous records. I keep a data creation log of every single year, title, date, who was in the room, what the splits are. I even try to get, you know, their information from their publishing. Are they PRO, ASCAP, BMI, CSAC? And it would be different for you guys in the UK, but keeping meticulous records have saved me many hours of heartache. So yes, I agree with Peter. Yeah.
Thank you. The only question on the chat that I haven't addressed, and I'm just going to put this to Felicity if that's okay, because we're almost out of time, and it's from Thiago, who I know is looking into a PhD, so I'd like to just give him the chance. Thiago is saying, well, the ego factor is a very interesting point. Do you have anything to add to the answer if we deconstruct the question, why are songs written, if we're thinking about ego?
Okay, I'll try and answer that, but I think of ego from a completely different perspective to probably everybody else here. I'm thinking about the id, the ego, and the superego, which is, you know, a much different thing. And, you know, when we talk about ego, we talk about wanting to strengthen our ego. And in fact, a songwriting process can do that and can be very important if someone has a weak ego. And when I say a weak ego, that means that's connected to this concept of identity, of knowing who you are. And so someone who has a fractioned or a dysfunctional identity will have a weak ego. And so the songwriting process can be a way to help strengthen that, for them to get clarity on who they are as a person, and in doing that, strengthen their ego and put them into a better psychological balance, so to speak. I know that's not the kind of question you were asking, but it's the only kind of answer I can give you.
Iago, do you want to come back for a moment, or?
No, that's a great answer, to be honest. Yeah, it's definitely a question that is slightly off topic, but yeah, your answer was very valid. Thank you.
The cross-reference for me is fascinating between the kind of psychological looking at the ego and all of the creative writing books that we have on offer about ego and creative process. And there are other books, again, to recommend if anybody wants to get in touch on the kind of creative writing, songwriting point of view. Right, we are at 1 o'clock. This has been really so useful and fascinating for me. And from the chat, I gather that others have really enjoyed it as well. I'd like to thank the panel very much for joining us from around the world. Yeah, really kind of international, and what great expertise we've had today. Thank you so much, Peter. It's been lovely to see you. All of our love to Ireland. And thank you very much, Bonnie, and can't wait to hopefully get back to Nashville in the near future.
Yes.
Thank you, Kit, for joining at such short notice and hearing about your project, which is always fascinating. Thank you, as ever, Julian, for your insight on all of this. And special thank you to Felicity for joining in Australia. And I'll raise a glass to you tonight as you get out of your 5th lockdown. And
I've already started.
Yay! Brilliant.
This isn't tea.
Brilliant to hear from you all. Thank you to everybody for joining. Simon's saying, if you have an idea for a future, this is Simon Barber, Dr. Simon Barber, for those, I think probably all of you know him, that he's the co-chair of the Songwriting Studies Research Network. If you have an idea for a future virtual event for the SSRN, please, even when you'd like to reach out to him. He's put his email address there. We've got the email address and most of the panel. Yes, you've got everybody's now. You can also come to me direct if you'd like to be put in touch with anybody on the panel or about any of the things that were mentioned or the text that we've mentioned. And also this will be recorded and shared, because there are quite a few colleagues who contacted me and said they couldn't be here today, they'd like to see it. So we'll be doing that, and I will also be doing another one in the autumn. And I really hope that I can see those of you at the SSRN in person this autumn. Thank you to Simon, and good evening, good morning, goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.
Merci, Ben Defay.
Slán.